House Committee on Natural Resources, Environment, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation will come to order. The clerk is going to read in a letter from the Speaker.
Dear Mr. Clerk, I am making the following changes to committees in the 102nd Legislature. Representative Nate Shannon will be removed from Natural Resources, Environment, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation. Sincerely, Joe Tate, Speaker of the House.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Will you please take the attendance?
Chair Pahutsky.
Here.
Representatives Hill. Here. Arbit. McFall.
Here.
Pies.
Present.
Martins.
Here.
Preston.
Here.
Schreiber.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Representative Pies moves to approve the minutes from our previous meeting on November 9th. Hearing no objection, the minutes are approved. We are going to be taking testimony on House Bill 5205, which has been sponsored by Representative Devendorf. At this time, I would invite the representative to come forward and speak to their bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We may be interrupted by our communication staff for just a second. Oh, thank you. Right on time. Madam Chair and members of the Natural Resources, Environment, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation Committee, congratulations on your very long committee name. Part 31 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act is Michigan's Water Guardian, an embodiment of Michigan's commitment to protecting its invaluable water resources through the Department of Energy, Great Lakes and Environment, or EGLE. But there's a hitch to this act. A rule was added nearly 2 decades ago that says EGLE can't update its information or rules on pollutants after 2006. It can't create new rules or regulations related to water quality. This is directly at odds with the fundamental purpose of EGLE. We're essentially entrusting EGLE with a critically important duty while simultaneously depriving it of the tools necessary to fulfill that duty. The inability to issue updated rules under this act not only places the state out of alignment with evolving federal standards, but also comprises Michigan's capacity to protect the environment and compromises Michigan's capacity to protect the environment and public health. The motives behind this imposed limitation were highly questionable from the start, undermining EGLE's ability to maintain a leadership role in environmental stewardship and compromising its ability to protect Michigan's environment, water, and people. There is no good reason for it. It goes against our ability to keep up on best practices, to recognize the wisdom of science. You are a scientist, Madam Chair. I am not. I'm a science nerd. Some folks know me to own several microscopes. At this point in our climate history, I do believe all of us should have an interest in our natural environment and science. Lord knows we have no idea how much we may have fallen behind or been able to prevent in those many years since we restricted our state's ability to protect our natural resources. At this point, we know that it has consequences. It has had consequences, and it would. After 18 years of EGLE being barred from incorporating the latest scientific advancements into our environmental regulations, our state has fallen into noncompliance with today's federal standards. Instances of this inefficiency are evident. Just take the list of bioaccumulative chemicals of concern, crucial for assessing threats to public health. Because it can't be updated with the newest science, we've been left stuck in the past while the rest of the country is moving forward. And that's not just stupid, it's dangerous. Take the predictability of toxic algae blooms in Lake Erie. We need numeric standards to tackle this, but the current rules won't let us adopt EPA-identified criteria, perpetuating a cycle where we anticipate the next algae bloom as if we're forecasting the weather. And that's not something we should be proud of when it comes to a lake that provides water to 11 million people. This rule also hinders EGLE from addressing challenges like PFAS contamination, despite substantial state investment in monitoring these hazardous and pervasive pollutants. The current rule prohibition impedes the inclusion of PFAS in chemical spillage regulations, which are essential for the prevention of and response to accidental chemical releases. House Bill 5205 is the solution. By axing this restrictive language, it gives EGLE the green light to use the latest science and keep our rules in tune with the times, ensuring that Michigan has the chance to become a leader in environmental protection and clean water standards while providing better support for Michigan's vital industries like farming and fishing. Passing this bill means Michigan can finally step up its game and become an environmental leader who proactively protects the health of our waters and our people, the bare minimum all Michiganders deserve. It's time for a change that makes sense for our state. This is a crucial and straightforward step toward a more resilient, forward-thinking, and environmentally conscious Michigan. That's why I strongly urge your support. I do want to emphasize that today's bill is not creating any new rules or regulations. It is not setting any new standards. It is simply finally asking that we untie our hands so that we can meet best practices, so that we can catch up with the times, so that we can, again, recognize the validity of what science already knows and keep up with the rest of the country. I have faith, after many conversations with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, that we are all committed to saving the incredible natural resources that the state has to offer, and that we know that we have to come together as a state with all of our departments to do so. And in this case, we need to allow this particular department to have a say in creating rules in order to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Minority Vice Chair Martin.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question goes to generic governmental type stuff, so I'll ask it now to the sponsor, and I know that my colleagues on my caucus have some specific questions, especially when we hear expert testimony. But we're a full-time legislature, so we have debate like this in an open forum that they don't, we have people of interest that come to us needing things, and we can debate that, and I think reasonably, depending on leadership, a reasonable amount of time. It is a representative government, so things are a little bit slow. I have an objection just overall of regulation without representation. So we can debate this. We can have committee hearings, and I don't know why it hasn't worked. If somebody has an issue, why it can't be brought forth and debated and answered in a timely enough manner. It may be not instantaneous, but at least the public's aware of it. At least private industry would be aware of it, instead of not knowing what the next rule could be on the next day by some agency that doesn't have as much of transparency. I just had office hours twice on Friday. Church, I had questions. Football games this weekend, I had questions. I had Coffee Connection this morning. I was at the Atlas Goodrich Chamber last night. They had questions. I'm in the community. If I'm their representative. And I think that if there's issues between the professionals here in Lansing and the local communities, that representation government should have the say in this and oversight and transparency versus promulgating rules through an agency that may not have as much transparency. So I just want to know why you can't just keep a representative government.
So I actually have an answer to that. I also am a very strong believer in representative government, and part of the reason I ran for office is because I wanted to make sure that we had a true representative democracy. And so I truly appreciate that, sir. This legislation still requires that any proposed new rule or regulation make its way through the regular rule-making process as prescribed by the Administrative Procedures Act. So there is still a transparent, open process that it needs to go through that the public is aware of and can take part of. The department would simply be able to put forward those rules and in order to keep up with standards. There will be checks and balances in place.
Okay. Are there any further questions for Representative Devendorf? Oh, Representative Pies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm thinking about Minority Vice Chair Martin's question, and I'm wondering, all of these rules that you were just speaking about, do any of them then come through the legislature for that, or is the legislature completely left out of this then? Because I believe that may be what Mr. Martin's
We
concern.
are going to hear from Eagle up next, and the process question about their processes may be better suited for
That
them.
would
But
be
by
a
all means,
better word.
Representative, if
Thank
there's
you.
something you'd like to add to that.
I certainly will defer to Eagle. Certainly, we have our unique rules and how we address several of the common concerns that the two share.
Are there any further questions for the rep? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, speaking to the bill are Sydney Hart, the legislative liaison, and Phil Argaroff, the acting director of the Water Resources Division for the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy.
Good morning, chairs, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 5205. Here with me today, I have Phil Argaroff, Acting Director of the Water Resources Division, and I'm Sydney Hart, Legislative Liaison with the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. I want to start off my testimony by thanking Representative Devendorf for bringing forward this very important legislation today. We're here to lend Eagle's voice to those supporting the legislation to repeal the prohibition of rulemaking on Part 31 under the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. First, some very brief background. Part 31 is Michigan's primary law to protect water quality. The regulations and permits under its authority come in many forms, ranging from National Pollution Discharge Elimination System wastewater permits under the Federal Clean Water Act, to ballast water protections, to aquatic nuisance species control, to stormwater management, to land application of sewage sludge and processed wastewater. Part 31 lays out Eagle's specific authorities and state requirements to ensure that our surface and groundwater in Michigan is adequately protected from contamination, and that all of us who use that water, whether it be for drinking, recreation, or something else, are sufficiently protected as well. But changes to Part 31 is part of a 2004 legislative package intended to establish fees to permit issues under the statute related to the department's ability to promulgate rules. And that's meant that, in many ways, a number of our regulations to protect Michigan's water have been stuck 2 decades in the past. Phil's going to provide a few examples here in a few minutes, but I want to provide some context. I think the types of potential future changes we're talking about fall into 3 broad categories. First, simply recognizing, referencing, and updating to match applicable federal standards. Many of the regulations under Part 31 implement the Federal Clean Water Act, but Michigan's framework has fallen woefully behind. Second, modernizing and streamlining regulations to reflect today's reality. In some permitting programs, the 2-decade-old requirements just don't make sense anymore. But Eagle can't take simple rulemaking actions that would simplify processes, both benefiting local government and regulated industries alike. And third, addressing important areas where our ability to protect people and the environment fall short. These can be as simple as just adding emerging contaminants to existing regulatory frameworks to make sure the state has enforceable requirements. With that, Phil will elaborate on a few examples here.
So thanks very much, Sydney. I'm going to talk about 4 examples on why we need to be able to modernize our administrative rules to fully implement the statute, Part 31. These 4 examples show how rules prohibition has not allowed our division to have up-to-date administrative rules to protect the environment, protect public health, and provide for efficient programs and economic benefits for the regulated community. The first example was Part 5 rules. These rules contain spill prevention, containment, and notification requirements for storage of salt, oil, and other regulated polluting materials. There's a table in these rules. This table became effective back in 2001 and has not been updated since. This means that liquid materials that may have high-strength concentrations of emerging contaminants such as PFAS and PFOA do not fall under Part 5 and therefore do not trigger the need to develop pollution incident prevention plans, provide secondary containment and surveillance, or require report and notification of the release of these materials. To better highlight this issue, in 2023, EGLE was made aware of 2 facilities piloting PFAS destructive technology in Michigan that have contracts to receive collected AFFF aqueous film foaming form and other wastes with high concentrations of PFAS from Department of Defense facilities and out-of-state AFFF collection programs for disposal. At this time, EGLE cannot require these facilities to comply with Part 5 rules for the storage of PFAS wastes, which is a concern as we know that spillage of these materials can cause significant impact to the environment, including contamination of groundwater and surface water, and impact public health. We'd like the opportunity to work with a stakeholder group, an example would be Michigan Manufacturing Association and others, to update these rules in a transparent manner to appropriately include their inclusion into Part 5 and allow pollution incident prevention plans, providing secondary containment, surveillance, and release notification. The second example is our Part 21 rules. These rules aid Water Resources Division in controlling the discharge of pollution to the waters of the state. These are all our rivers, lakes, streams, and groundwater, and we all know that water defines the state of Michigan. The National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit process requires us to issue these permits for discharges of surface water and state groundwater as well, that discharge to ground or the surface. Let's discuss just the NPDES permit program today to surface water. The NPDES permit process was initiated under the Federal Water Pollution Control Act amendments in 1972. It's also known as the Clean Water Act. The purpose of this program is to control the discharge of these pollutants into surface water by imposing effluent limitations to protect the environment. Authority to administer this program was delegated from the U.S. EPA to the state of Michigan in October 1973. That was 50 years. We were one of the first states to receive that delegated authority, and we've had it for the last 50 years. Our Part 21 rules are tied to federal regulations issued under the Federal Clean Water Act. These rules include specific dates of issued federal regulations, in, for example, 2000 or 2005, so we can't even keep up to date when federal regulations are revised. As a delegated program from US EPA, this creates a problem for us to issue permits that account for up-to-date federal regulations when our rules are tied to older federal regulations. Examples include incorporation of sufficiently sensitive methods. That's using the latest regulatory and laboratory methods, and updated rules to fully implement the construction stormwater permitting program. The third example is our Part 23 rules. These rules allow Water Resources Division to implement the industrial pretreatment program. Pollutants in industrial wastewater may compromise or interfere with the treatment processes at municipal wastewater treatment plants or further contaminate waters of the state. To protect these municipal wastewater treatment plants and the environment, the pretreatment program requires industrial discharges to use treatment techniques and management practices to reduce or eliminate the discharge of harmful pollutants to sanitary sewers. The pretreatment program is a core part of the Clean Water Act under the NPDES program. The federal regulations have been streamlined since our Part 23 rules were finalized to reduce the burden on municipalities and local industries, while still maintaining environmental protection. Because of our lack of rule-making authority, the state of Michigan has not been able to update these Part 23 rules to align with federal requirements. Updates to the streamlined federal regulations including allowing greater flexibility in complying with sampling requirements, granting municipalities more flexibility while implementing the federal categorical requirements, clarifying that municipalities may allow industries to use best management practices as an alternative to numeric limits in their pretreatment permits that are issued from the municipality, and clarifying the definition of significant noncompliance as it applies to industrial users. For Michigan to fully implement these changes and reduce the administrative and technical burden on both municipalities and local industries, Part 23 needs to be revised. And our final example is the Part 4 rules. This is also administrative rules under the statute under Part 31. These are our water quality standards to adequately protect surface waters, to meet all designated uses, fishing, swimming, source water protection for drinking water. Being able to modernize our Part 4 rules will allow Eagle to implement current best practices in chemical risk assessment, as well as adopt new methods to better protect public health. An example includes using qPCR techniques to rapidly determine if a beach is safe from dangerous levels of microorganisms, E. coli. qPCR is a laboratory technique that amplifies and quantifies the target microorganism DNA to determine the total amount of microorganisms in that sample. The method can allow local health departments to quickly determine the risk to public health at our Michigan beaches and make a closure decision within hours, as opposed to older techniques that may take more than 24 hours. Incorporating Eagle has worked closely with our local health departments to adopt the use of qPCR, and incorporating this method into our Part 4 rules will provide further reinforcement that Eagle and its local health department partners have both authority and flexibility to rapidly assess beach safety and better be protective of our beach-going public. Again, adoption of qPCR within our Part 4 rules is just one example of how modernizing risk assessment approaches and methods can allow Eagle to be more protective of our Michigan citizens. Thank you.
To reiterate, these changes and updates will happen like every other rulemaking begins with every other program in Eagle. We'll consult with stakeholders during the drafting process and make earnest attempts to incorporate their suggestions and address concerns. Then our rulemaking will proceed under the rules set forth in the Administrative Procedures Act, including public comments, periods, public hearings, responding to comments, and JCAR oversight. Thank you again for the committee's time to consider this important legislation to allow Michigan's water quality protections to be updated to reflect the needs of today. Phil and I will be happy to address the committee and any questions they may have.
Vice Chair Hill?
Thank you. It is of great concern that we are not using rules that are 20 years old. I just want to be clear. And we have 90% of the city of Marquette's beaches are public, and making sure that they are healthy for people to recreate is very core to our identity of being able to access Lake Superior. And so I'm very, very concerned about, so how you talked a little bit about E. coli and what it means to be able to identify that earlier. It's my understanding that in the method that we're currently using, that it takes 24 hours to identify, and that in fact we close a beach because yesterday it was dangerous. Is that accurate, and could you enunciate on that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate assessment. We've helped fund a number of the local health departments to do the technique that's discussed, the qPCR technique. It provides a quicker response time, so I think that can help protect public health, but I think it can also protect the economy, the local economy, by saying, hey, the beach is safe today, we can use it. So we feel like these incorporation of these rules in a revised Part 4 will help us up-to-date science. And I think that's the biggest thing, is we want to use sound science to move forward into the future and affect our decisions using the most modern available science.
Thank you.
Minority Vice Chair Martin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just for a little historical, for 50 years now, then we've been authorized to do the federal government's job of maintaining our clean water here in Michigan under our own authority. So there has to be a process in those 50 years to come up with rules, laws, whatever the legislation oversight has to be. One of the big examples I would have is how the copper and iron promulgated rules come through in 2015, and why couldn't a procedure like that continue to be used?
So it's a good point. In the first 50 years, the first 30 of those years, we had rulemaking authority. So we were able to update our rules. We were updated our water quality standards. We were able to update our Part 21 rules, which authorize discharge of wastewater to receiving waters. It's the last 20 years that we haven't had rulemaking authority. It depends on if the rule that or the administrative rule you're talking about is under the statute under Part 31. If it's not, we do have rulemaking authority for that item. But if it's under Part 31, that's our Part 4 water quality standards, our Part 5 polluting materials, our Part 21 discharge rules, our Part 22 groundwater program, our Part 23 industrial pretreatment program, our Part 24 biosolids program. All of those are under the umbrella of the statute. And the statute requires us to maintain and make sure that designated uses are protected. Those are the uses that protect all of us so we can use our waters, whether it's industrial, agricultural, residence, fishable, swimmable, source water for drinking water. What's happened in the last 20 years is we don't have that rulemaking authority under those administrative rules, those parts that I just listed. And so it makes it very difficult for us to move forward and have even a program that's equivalent to the federal programs when they are delegated programs.
Representative McFall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question. You had mentioned about using sound science. Can you tell me when the rulemaking process is occurring, how many scientists are actually involved in those decision-making versus just, I don't want to say bureaucrats, but, but basically just non-scientists? How about that?
That's a good question. I mean, our department and our division in particular is full of scientists and engineers, and that's how we're hired. So environmental quality analysts are scientists. Engineers are hired. They're either civil engineers, chemical engineers. They're hired into the department. So the people that are formulating the administrative consent or the administrative rules would be scientists or engineers that are familiar with these programs and can move forward. We believe that stakeholder processes would also be involved, and all that help from the outside, I think, would allow us to formulate transparent rules that are protective of public health and the environment.
Representative Preston.
Thank you. I'm starting to see a pattern here. You know, we have the repeal of the no stricter than federal, repeal of the Environmental Rule Review Committee, and now you want broad authority, you know, order authority without legislative oversight or input. Is the legislature just another group of generalists that don't possess the ability to grant or deny your requests?
So I believe all our programs and the policies that we have on how we formulate administrative procedures and administrative rules all work its way through a transparent process. So we'll have rulemaking authority. We'll work with the outside stakeholder groups that could include industries as well as the regulated community. We'll move that forward. But through the process that Sydney described, the legislature can be involved as well in this process as we move forward too. So we believe in a transparent process. We believe in sound science moving forward, but we want to do this in a way that makes us as protective of the federal rules. You described not being more protective. I think some of the things I talked about today mean we can't even be as protective as the federal rules require.
One follow-up. So you said for the last 20 years, how did you promulgate the rules regarding PFAS?
We were able, under Rule 57, to establish water quality values under Rule 57 that protect and meet designated uses. So we have 5 of those right now, water quality values that protect the environment, protect aquatic life, protect public health. Once we could establish those water quality values through the calculation procedure that was approved by the legislature, went through public comment back in the late 90s, we established these water quality values. Once those water quality values are established, they can be implemented within our permitting programs.
And how were those levels established? What metric did you use? Because there's been a lot of debate nationally as to what what the PFAS toxicity levels actually are.
Yeah, so there's a detailed process that's laid out in our Rule 57 on Part 4. Our Part 4 water quality standards. I can share that with you, and we can have one of our toxicologists talk to you. But there's a extensive way that they research the existing science and formulate based on that through the procedures that are laid out in that Rule 57 on the appropriate water quality value to establish. So we have that ability under Rule 57. We were able to establish water quality values. Once we had those values, we could use our existing permitting programs.
So it was internally sourced, or was it using outside resources?
It uses a lot of outside sources as well for all the research that's developed.
Thank you.
Yep.
Vice Chair Hill?
Thank you. Yeah. I want to turn to the pre-treatment, because that is, I think, also, we're going to hear more about that later. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to that. In particular, I know from my experience working on water quality issues for 30 years that there has been a big shift in how permits are. We've gone from sort of that numerical standard to the best practices, which allows, and the idea of allowing more flexibility and working with industry to make sure, and I want to understand, by stopping the clock 20 years ago, where did we leave it, and then how, and then are there in fact is there more flexibility that could be allowed to industry if we followed the current EPA standards?
Yeah, that's very true. I think the streamlining rules that we haven't been able to incorporate into Part 23, I think do affect our program. So I think an example that you just gave, I think, is an excellent one, where we would have to, our municipalities would have to meet their pretreatment requirements, issue permits with specific effluent limits for all types of industries. In some, it may be appropriate, and that's just fine. In some, science has suggested that BMPs may be more appropriate than specific effluent limits. So we think that I apologize. Yeah, best management practices. So I think what this allows us to do is just one aspect of the streamlining rules. It allows us to keep up to date with the federal streamlining. We learn a lot. I think in all permitting programs, that's why permits are issued for 5 years. Science helps us to move forward in better protective ways of the environment, and in a lot of times, more streamlined ways and effective ways for industry as well.
Rep. Shriver?
Sorry about that. How is this policy any different than essentially giving you the power to play house? Everything that I've heard here, transparent process, public hearing, stakeholder input, that's something that the legislature already does. So what I see here is an unelected State Department playing the role of our elected body. And so how is what you're doing any different than that?
So the statutes are developed by the legislature. Administrative rules are procedures, are requirements on how we implement to meet those statutes. So I think there is, a significant role for the legislature, and that is maintained by giving us rulemaking authority back. I think within that rulemaking authority, I can leave the policy, but we have promulgation policy that requires us to have stakeholder groups involved. And I think Sydney described the process that the legislature can still be involved in that as well. For the last 20 years, we have not been able to update our rules. This puts us in a position where we may lose, and we could effectively lose, our delegated authority to issue permits. I don't think that's necessarily good for the state to have permit writers in Chicago issue NPDES permits to dischargers in the state. I think it's more effective if the state can do this. If we can't update these rules, it's possible that they could pull the program.
I had a question sort of building on this, just because we've been hearing a lot about, like unelected people making decisions and things like that. One, elsewhere in your department and in other departments, administrative rules are just created. Correct. This seems to be an issue that is created by this sunset in this one particular realm around administrative rules. Is that correct, or am I mistaken?
So I can answer that in terms of Water Resources Division. Part 31 is the only place, that statute, where we don't have rulemaking authority. We have it under Part 41, that's our wastewater construction permitting program. We have it in other statutes as well, under 451, Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. So it's very rare that I think that statutes are promulgated and the departments that are involved don't have rulemaking authority.
Thank you. That's helpful. And in terms of departments themselves, the governor is the person who appoints the head of the department, right? The director?
Correct, yes.
And the governor is elected.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you for refreshing my memory. Minority Vice Chair Martin.
Before I ask my question, Madam Chair, I don't know if Representative Shriver was finished.
He's finished.
So, on promulgating the rules, whatever the federal level is right now, do you have any problems promulgating a rule for that, or is it just if we wanted to go stricter than the federal rule? And with this, the debate on the national level is the Chevron deference of promulgating rules by bureaucratic agencies, given the authority of law with their rules. So would this be the same as the debate on the Chevron deference?
So my only understanding of that is what I saw in the paper this morning. So I can't answer that question, but I can answer your first question, and that was, what are we talking about in terms of the rule changes? Right now, they refer to Code of Federal Regulations that could be 2005 or 2000. So 20 years ago, these are the Code of Federal Regulations that are used in our program. All we're asking for in this area, in Part 21, is that we can make it so that we're updated to the current Code of Federal Regulations, so we could be equivalent to the federal program. That's what we're asking for.
So since we were delegated the authority for the Clean Water Act, does the federal government have any oversight as far as, are we being penalized or fined by not, and why isn't that brought to the legislature so we can deal with the being penalized?
It's possible. They are currently reviewing our program right now. They're asking for self-assessment of our programs. They're very well aware of the fact that we do not have rulemaking authority. They understand that we cannot implement the most recent federal regulations and the federal rules. Is this going to be a problem in the future? I don't know, but it very well could be in our delegated program.
And last question is from Rep. Preston.
Thank you. So this involves, permitting, drain commissioners, floodplain permits. My Indian Lake drawdown permit application that Schoolcraft County's been going after. A lot of these people, like I'll take Indian Lake for example, they have 50 years of past practice of drawing down that lake, and they simply were requested Eagle to give them a permit to draw down and observe what they've been doing for 50 continuous years. That permit was denied under really no scientific basis. You say that you have modeling after it, but you also acknowledge that you really had no knowledge of their annual drawdown for the last 50 years. But yet you still issued a denial on that drawdown. This is the type of authority that is of issue. And I think things like this take us further down that path where our constituents get steamrolled by your bureaucracies and by your rules and don't allow them to move forward in a judicious way, trying to protect their own property and their own way of life. If you could address that.
I'm not sure that the denial was under Part 31, or it could have been under Part 301 or Part 303, where we do have rulemaking authority. So I'm not. I think you may be mixing up the statute and the permit program that's part of our resource program, and all that's addressed in our resource program is our floodplain permits. So on the resource side, I'm going to say to you that our staff works with the best science and best information to move forward under Part 31, and that's always been our intent. We don't have political motives. what we try to do is make sure that we use the best science available and move forward because it's consistent with the federal rules, not in excess of the federal rules. So that's our desire and that's our hope.
Thank you both very much. Next up, we have Ben Terrell from the Michigan Farm Bureau speaking in opposition of the bills. Bill.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ben Terrell. I'm here today representing the Michigan Farm Bureau. Thank you for the opportunity to provide brief testimony today in opposition to House Bill 5025. Michigan Farm Bureau is the largest general farm organization in the state, representing over 40,000 farm families. Our policy positions are shaped through grassroots efforts where local members engage in development, debate, and adoption of our policies at both county and state levels. Michigan's food and agriculture industry contributes approximately $104 billion annually to the economy and accounts for 923,000 jobs, or about 22% of the state's total workforce. We are the second most diverse state in the country in terms of the variety of agricultural commodities grown, and consequently have numerous processing and value-added businesses which export across the nation and around the world. Michigan farmers are exemplary stewards and have been leaders in nationally recognized environmental programs such as the Michigan Agriculture Environmental Assurance Program, or MEAP, USDA Regional Conservation Partnership Programs, or RCPP, and National Ecosystem Service Exchanges. Michigan Farm Bureau policy recognizes the necessary role that the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy plays, explicitly supporting timely, effective, and consistent enforcement of environmental laws and issuance of permits. MDEGL, in conjunction with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, implement regulations and provide technical assistance in the rare instances where farms have environmental issues. However, our policy goes on to insist on applying sound science and performing economic impact analysis to MDEGL rules and standards prior to promulgation. This is something that MDEGL continues to fail to do, creating arbitrary standards and ignoring the implications, especially for small businesses like farms and associated processors. This demonstrated abuse of discretion and lack of transparency would only be further confounded by the legislature's impending dissolution of the Environmental Rules Review Committee. Michigan Farm Bureau members share your commitment to preserving our state's natural resources and protecting the environment. However, House Bill 5205 is not the way to accomplish this goal. Michigan needs thorough scientific and economic review of potential environmental rules, as well as the transparency and opportunities for stakeholder input that the legislature currently provides. The legislature should not relinquish this authority and responsibility. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony, and would be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you for your very brief testimony. I guess I don't understand if we're saying, my understanding is the purpose and intent of this bill is to make things current and to not leave us in 2006. Why would we not want to do that? I didn't hear a clear answer to that. Why do we want to stay in 2006?
Thank you for the question, Representative. I think as others have alluded to, there's a list of, I've seen from the department, approximately 4 issue areas, and again, entirely appropriate the legislature could take those issues up and resolve those as they have for the previous 20 years.
So could you give me an example of that, please? I'm new here. I don't. What does that actually look like? What would the legislature actually do? I really, truly don't understand. I really don't understand.
Sure. I don't know that I'm the person to answer that specific question. I mean, you all undertake these issues every day, and any of these issues, I've seen some of the justification, like updating tables. Right? There's no question the legislature could update citations in statute to represent those updated tables. What I'd love to share is an example, I think, that's top of my mind where this has gone wrong. For years, obviously, there's been this prohibition on rulemaking. In the interim, numerous instances, de facto rules are sort of improperly promulgated, and that's being litigated in several instances, but being properly promulgated and put into permits. And so a recent one that comes to my mind, and what I think we might be able to expect if we saw Eagle regain their rulemaking authority was related to small meat processors in the state of Michigan. So, and just to be very brief with this, these entities received a new permit. In that permit, it contains specific numeric criteria for which their discharges need to attain. These businesses just, and it's not an issue for the larger businesses. For a lot of these smaller businesses that work with local farmers, that work with 4-H fairs across the state, they have to meet these criteria. I've spoken with some of these individuals, and they've been quoted upwards of $800,000 to update their systems. That's just not a cost that their businesses can sustain. We're going to lose these businesses. It's going to impact our local farm communities. It's going to impact our local fairs. It's going to have ripple effects across our economy. So I think those are the type of things that we're fearful of.
May I follow up? I guess, okay, things are expensive. Costs have gone up for everyone. We've had significant, inflation has come down, but we had these high costs. And I hear that because they did not have rulemaking authority, things had to go sort of sideways and into things that they maybe didn't belong. I hear that. So I feel like you've made the case for giving them, clear transparency as opposed to, having it go in sideways in some fashion. And I'm sorry these systems cost $800,000. That's very significant cost. But I'm looking for more information about how, if we bring things to current standards, we are going to somehow not harm things. I haven't heard that case yet, so I'm eager to hear what others have to say.
Representative Preston?
In regards to the meat processors, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is it's mitigation of the nitrogen levels.
It's nitrogen and phosphorus levels. Yes.
Yeah, so we're mitigating nitrogen for the meat processors when it's a necessary component in agriculture. So we're going to arbitrarily and expensively require the nitrogen to be removed on that side, where the farmer just has to turn around and buy the nitrogen to put on his fields. It seems like just a circular firing squad on this, and an unnecessary burden, to everybody, when everything could just work together, in a symbiotic relationship. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So I think that assertion is correct. In some instances, these wastewaters are now being hauled via truck, via tanker to a wastewater facility, and that there's a very valid argument that this is a very environmentally unfriendly way to handle these materials that could be used for beneficial reuse. But to just briefly touch on the previous comment that you mentioned, I think that having been a part of some of these transparent permit processes, several times during this specific permit process, we submitted public comment that these were criteria that did not make sense. Where did these levels come from? That these were going to push farms out of the market, and so as I would say is typically the case, those just were responded to that this was sort of Eagle's discretion, and these were just the standards that they felt were appropriate. So, if we have an honest conversation about sound science, I think we need to establish these values and look at where do these come from and how are these established empirically.
All right. Next up, we are going to hear from Tim Langholz from NFIB, who is also wishing to speak in opposition. Folks, going forward, if we can keep everything to about 5 minutes so that we also have time for questions, that would be really, really helpful. So the floor is yours, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I will keep comments brief. We did submit a letter, so you all have that in front of you as well. So my name is Tim Langholz. I am the Assistant State Director here in Michigan for the National Federation of Independent Business. We represent small and independent businesses in the state of Michigan and across the nation as well. I am here to oppose House Bill 5205. We're not opposed at all to protecting our natural resources. What we are opposed to, though, is giving the power of essentially making law to the department. The legislature, as you've heard other individuals testify, is fully capable of updating and creating new standards in an open setting while also being available and accountable to the people that they serve. So, like I said, we did submit a letter that has a little bit more detail in it, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for Tim at this time? All right. Thank you very much, Tim. I appreciate you taking the time. Next up, I am going to bring forward Megan Tinsley, the Water Policy Director for the Michigan Environmental Council, who is speaking in support of the bill.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee. So I will try to keep this brief. A lot of points have already been covered, but Part 31 of NERIPA says that the department shall protect and conserve the water resources of the state and shall have control of the pollution of surface or underground waters of the state and the Great Lakes. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the language added 2 decades ago contradicts the intent of the act itself. How are the waters of the state protected when we can't even update a list of chemicals that are considered toxic? It doesn't make sense to charge an agency with a responsibility and then leave them without the tools to carry out this charge. So this is, as been discussed, left us out of compliance with federal standards, including being able to update floodplain maps and unable to protect the environment and human health to the best of our ability. So this has been touched on, but as we learn more, the list of bioaccumulative chemicals of concern cannot be updated. These are chemicals that concentrate in animal tissues like PCBs and mercury that pose a threat to human health, and we can't add to this list. And liquids containing PFAS and PFOA cannot be included in a list of over 950 other chemicals labeled as flammable, explosive, or corrosive, those requiring special storage. And I want to note here, because we've heard a lot about not needing more rules, but quite frankly, I think we do need rules for storing things, having proper surveillance, and cleanup plans, and pollution prevention plans for things that most of us have already have levels of in our blood. The state of Michigan has invested so much financially in the detection of and monitoring for PFAS, yet we can't currently add chemicals containing PFAS and PFOA to have proper storage. Again, it doesn't make sense. And this bill provides a straightforward fix by simply striking the added language and returning the ability to EGLE that it once had and as it currently does under other sections of NERIPA. And in June, this committee voted to repeal the no stricter than federal law. And our testimony at that time noted that there was a chilling effect on rule promulgation across the board because of expected challenges once that law went into effect. But for anything falling under Part 31, which covers water resources of the Great Lakes state, there remains this inability to promulgate any rules. No stricter than federal can't apply because the ability isn't there. It's time to close this gap by passing House Bill 5205 and restoring the ability to better protect public health and the waters of the state. And I will say, based on previous comments, the legislature is not equipped to do these sorts of things. As Phil mentioned, it's the toxicologist that reviews these chemicals that we want to list as bioaccumulative. Now, some of you have science backgrounds, but some of you don't. And quite frankly, the expertise lies with the agency that's charged with protecting water resources. It doesn't lie with the legislature. And I will say, but what you are equipped to do is to provide grant funding to industries that have had to come into compliance with new standards, that, like the meat processing permit that was mentioned. Those facilities receive taxpayer grant-funded money to come into compliance with meeting new permits restrictions which are designed to protect public health. That is not just nitrogen and phosphorus. There are cleaning agents, grease, fat, and blood in those materials, and that, I'm sorry, that belongs with the agency that's charged with protecting water quality. So I will address any questions, but I thank you for your attention.
So I don't have any questions for Megan. All right, thank you very much for your time, Megan. Next up, testifying in opposition, we have John O'Brien, the Genesee County Drain Commissioner.
Good morning, Chairman Polsky, Vice Chairman Martin, and all the committee members and staff. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the legislation. I did have written comment, but for brevity, I'm going to address a couple things. I'm John O'Brien, Genesee County Drain Commissioner, Deputy Drain Commissioner. We represent 34 sewer and water customer communities in our county and 5 other counties. We also operate over 1,700 drains representing 1,500 miles of water course. We are the stakeholder in the discussion with Eagle. We have participated in their stakeholder meetings, and it's not as they describe. My biggest issue is this rule's been in place for 20 years. How many times have they come to the legislature and actually requested a change? Is it all of a sudden, in the last 20 years, all these changes have built up and there's been no request for a change? They say it's difficult to change rules. I don't think it's difficult. You're a full-time legislature. They can come before you anytime during the year and request a change and go through the process. I think that's the issue, is we need to keep rulemaking and legislation with the legislature. With that, I guess I'll open up for any questions.
Are there any questions? Rep. Shriver?
Thank you. You mentioned rulemaking and the legislative process and how we are able to do that as the elected body. How would you, and this is just because a lot of the individuals before you mentioned this rulemaking, how would you, for the folks at home, how would you break down the difference between a department making a rule and the legislature making a law in the way that it affects farmers, in the way that it affects everyday folks? You know, obviously there's a way to differentiate the difference between a rule and a law technically, but just kind of broadly speaking, what's the difference for you as a stakeholder?
As a stakeholder is we develop our systems over with a 20-year plan. We have 5-year permits. We have to develop plans to meet the rules and the legislature. So randomly allowing rule change has a significant impact on us. So as example, there is a consideration of a rule change for chlorides and salts affecting wastewater treatment plants. Now, there is current rules on the books. The department is considering using Rule 57 as they talked to modify and sidestep the existing rules. That is a significant cost. I've got a wastewater treatment plant with a $3 million a year operation. Their proposal is a $20 million expansion of the treatment plant for us as a contributor and not the primary source of salts in the river. So from that standpoint is rulemaking and the process needs to remain with the legislature.
So for all intents and purposes, would you say that lawmaking and rulemaking, as it affects you as a stakeholder and as it affects the people at home, it's pretty much the same thing? Would you say?
Yes, in our view, it is.
So therefore, would you say that this policy is essentially allocating lawmaking power to a body of unelected individuals?
I look at it as removing the check and balance in government. Administration appoints the agencies. Legislature has the right to oversee. Yeah, and they need to keep that right.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Hill?
Thank you. There are significant industries, I'm sure, in Genesee County. The pre-treatment of those chemicals that they may be discharging into your facility is something that is a significant concern. They could shut down your plant with something that's that unintentionally or intentionally discharged into your plant. Is that not true?
Yes, that's true.
And so I, as a legislator, could solvents. We need solvents to clean materials. Those are going to generally, that's going to be a degreaser or something that is of a chemical that if it got into our water system I don't know what those levels should be. And so you're asking me, Jen Hill, to identify the level of degreasing that's appropriate and effluent so that it doesn't impact your plant. Is that what you're asking me to do, sir?
No, what I'm asking you to do is let the state agency bring forth their documents, bring forth into the public realm, not behind doors, into the public. This is the rule we want to change. And you guys give them the heads up or no. I mean, they're still doing the science. They make the presentation. Again, it's how many times in the last 20 years has the department come forth and asked for a rule change?
You're still asking me to understand how much degreasing is appropriate in the effluent if I'm making that final decision.
You're making the final decision on is the rule appropriate or not, and they're gonna present that evidence.
Last question on this one is going to be Rep. Pies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as a county drain commissioner, I'm going to assume then that you really care about our water. So is that correct? A correct assumption?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So then what I am hearing from you then is that your concern is more of a financial.
No. I think our concern is the ability to make rules, regardless of whether they're good for the environment or expensive. I don't think an administrative, faceless bureaucrat should have the right to make rules that have a significant impact on the operations of the state without legislative oversight.
So if your concern was neither about the water quality and not about the finances, then it would seem to me that you are here more as a resident who just happens to have this title and is concerned only about the authority of the rulemaking process, because the finances aren't concerning to you and the water quality aren't concerning to you.
Yes, there has to be a balance between the two. Because again, it's part of that economic evaluation. Is the cost of the rule exceeding or within the benefits the rule develops?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Next up, testifying virtually is Christy McGilvray, the Political and Legislative Director for Sierra Club of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I apologize that I am not there in person. I got way late on the roads, so I really appreciate the opportunity to testify virtually. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm testifying today in support of House Bill 5205. You've heard a lot from colleagues. I'll work to respect everyone's time. I specifically would like to address the need for EGLE rulemaking under Rule 24, which addresses the procedural requirements and issues of permits for the plans for the land application of wastewater treatment residuals. We've heard this referred to as biosolids. I invite all members of the committee to follow up with me to get details of our concerns about the land application of wastewater treatment residuals, but I'm going to do my best to keep our concerns here succinct and related to this rulemaking authority. So in summary, wastewater treatment residuals, they don't just contain human waste. Testing shows that there are hundreds of persistent organic pollutants, pharmaceuticals, often viruses and bacteria outside of the pathogens of concern that they currently are statutorily required to treat. To illustrate this point, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the CDC was actually tracking wastewater streams to try and track COVID outbreaks before hospitals and public health officials could actually report them. So we don't have any great perfect solutions for what to do with the billions of gallons of human waste flowing from our wastewater treatment plants. Our options are fairly limited. We can either incinerate them, burn them, land apply them, or bury them in a landfill. So for these reasons, the majority of wastewater treatment solids are land applied because along with the problematic things they do carry, they also have nutrients that can be important for agriculture. This has been the relatively justifiable operating principle that created the whole land application program for wastewater treatment solids. However, when PFAS became properly identified as a serious human health concern, which it is, this whole calculation changed. The persistence of PFAS in the environment makes it a specifically unique threat to our agricultural system. And until very recently, we have not been testing for it anywhere. Within the past 6 years, this has changed. And in many ways, Michigan has led the country truly in quantifying PFAS's different pathways into agriculture with their thorough study of wastewater treatment sludge. But although we quantified the problem, we have not solved it. Eagle has been able to address a handful of the worst case scenario point source polluters, which was fantastic. But again, long story short, the scope and the scale of the PFAS contamination problem in agriculture is just now unfolding. You may be familiar with one of the casualties of the profligate use of this dangerous category of chemicals, Grostic Farms in Livingston County. But we know for sure that Jason Grostic is not alone in his situation. This is a much bigger problem, and how we handle this is going to be incredibly difficult. However, as we work to use the best available science to figure out exactly how much we contaminated our soil by spreading municipal and industrial waste on it for decades, we must make sure that we give our state agency tools it needs to set the most health protective standards for the ongoing use of the land application program. Eagle has been doing groundbreaking research to try and figure out what exactly is going on with PFAS in agriculture. And based on that, they have to be able to act. Right now, they can't. They have to be able to clarify procedural requirements for the issuance of land application permits and residuals management plans, including minimum requirements for a complete application, the frequency of renewal, submittal of required monitoring, and inspection and sampling authority of the state of biosolids application sites to monitor adherence to requirements. This is basic. The legislature has not done it and is not equipped to do it. And it is incumbent upon us to give our regulators the basic tools they need to protect us from further harm while we work through the thorny mess of the historic contamination that we've created because of the mistakes of previous generations. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or follow up with members later.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Christy at this time? All right. Thank you very much, Christy. Next up, we are going to hear from Brian Wendling, Joe Bush, and I believe this is Deborah Bosworth. I'm sorry if I got that wrong, though, from the Michigan Association of County Drain Commissioners. They are testifying in opposition.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you. Brian Wendling, I'm the Saginaw County Public Works Commissioner. With me is Joe Bush, the Ottawa County Water Resources Commissioner. Let me first state that I'll use the term Drain Commissioner because we're most commonly known as. We're here representing the Michigan Association of County Drain Commissioners. We clearly understand the issue with pollutants. We are not in support of pollutants out there. We want to see clean water just like everybody else. Quite frankly, it's a lot of our job is working hand in hand with Eagle, whether it be through a drain project, through NPDES permitting, and ensuring that our stormwaters, as they discharge our systems and get out into the waters of the state, whether it be a river or one of the Great Lakes, that they are clean. We work extremely hard at that, and again, work hand in hand with them, ensuring that we have those quality resources, including drinking water. One of our concerns, however, is with the idea, the concept of reinstating rulemaking authority is the unintended consequences that come along with that. For many years, the Drain Association, through Part 31, has been offered exemptions and allowing us to go out and perform maintenance activities on drains that don't necessarily require a permit. And those were all negotiated in good faith. Our concern is that if rulemaking authority is provided and granted, that some of those exemptions that we currently have are likely to go away, or certainly subject to go away at some point in time. The question is, why? Obviously, why is that a concern to us? First and foremost, if you're familiar at all with the drain code and our operations, it becomes a matter of cost. Our costs, or any cost that we incur on a drain project, goes right back to our constituents. I say my constituents as an elected official, your constituents as elected officials. Every dime spent on a drain project gets assessed to an assessment district and goes back to those folks. In the event that we were to lose some of these exemptions, I think I can safely say we would see our regular routine maintenance costs at a minimum double, if not triple or quadruple. Those costs can turn around and go right back again to our constituents. That's not something I'm comfortable having to deal with. I certainly don't want to look my constituents in the eye and tell them that we now have a state agency out there that has just changed the rules and as a result changes our maintenance practices, increasing costs, therefore increasing costs to them. These are also folks, I might add, that most of which are living in a floodplain and already paying additional costs for flood insurance, just simply to be there. We've got a responsibility as commissioners to maintain this infrastructure that's out there. This infrastructure, I might add, I think is a key component, is in excess, a lot of cases of over 100 years old. The purpose and intent of this infrastructure was to be a utility, not a resource. Okay? It's not an environmental resource, although it may have become that to some degree over time. It's a utility. A utility in a sense that we can get rid of stormwater, keep property habitable, keep farm ground farmable, keep people safe of disease, keep their basements from flooding. We don't need to be adding any additional costs onto them by the virtue of a change of rule or what somebody's thought might be, or change of administration. I've provided you a map. If you want, that's a quick map of Saginaw County. The area in blue designates areas that are within a 100-year floodplain. Should we lose those exemptions, any work inside of that area would be subject to significant cost increase and again passed on to those residents. We've been told that the intent is not to remove those exemptions. Clearly it's of some level of concern to us. As a means of providing a solution, we've lived with these exemptions, albeit not perfect, but we've lived with them, we've accepted them, and could continue to work with those into the future. Our recommendation would be that those be codified by statute and put into place so we can continue to work under those. And then, if there's room or room for any other rulemaking authorities, that be dealt with separately.
We are about to run out of time, so I'm trying to make this as brief as I can. But you were talking about flood insurance and the costs associated with all of these possible changes, but also the additional cost of that's already being incurred by the flood insurance. Is it true that Eagle has not been able to update because of the restrictions around Part 31? They've not been able to update their language around floodplains and things like that. And we are, in fact, if the state loses its ability to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program because we are using outdated language and we cannot update it, could Michiganders not lose the ability to get flood insurance statewide? I mean, isn't that already a concern? And wouldn't that exacerbate their costs enormously if they're then on the hook personally for flood damage?
Good question, but that's not one that I can answer. That's way outside of my wheelhouse in terms of who's insurable, who isn't, and what the rules and regulations around insurances are. I'm just simply making a point that the folks that I'm dealing with here and addressing are already subject to flood insurance costs. And now, by adding rulemaking authority, we roll the dice and potentially increasing their drain maintenance costs.
Okay. Rep. Pies has a question.
Yeah, I'll keep this really short again. Again, I am hearing that The main concern is financial. I believe water is priceless, and from what I hear from my constituents, who this is one of their main concerns, especially in my district, half of it is along Lake St. Clair. A good part of why they wanted me here was to fight for the environment and especially water quality, because we have beaches closed along there. Now, our Macomb County Drain Commissioner is Candace Miller. I don't know where she is on this, but she's a fierce champion of water quality. That cannot be doubted. I would believe that she would want everything updated to at least federal standards to address this, to address our beach closures. We've got like about 3 beaches closed there, and to address the fishing because people fish off of one of the docks in St. Clair Shores. So I just want to throw that out there from a different perspective. I will, in fact, go back to Commissioner Miller and ask her for her thoughts about this. But my assumption and my feeling is having a lake is this. Thank you.
Last question on this portion will be from Rep. Preston.
Thank you. As the federal rules are updated going forward, do you guys simply ignore them or do you follow them?
We follow those.
Okay, so I guess I don't understand the disconnect here and the assertion that the legislature does not possess the ability to process, absorb, and render good decision-making is, I guess it throws us right in with the group of generalists that we heard with the other committees. I mean, I think that's our mandate, and thank you for your testimony today. And I hope that we embrace our responsibility with our constituents to provide oversight and to provide a check and balance. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate your time. The very last person that we will have is Carrie Lesueur, who is the legal director for Love of Water. Are you here? Okay, and if you could keep it to about 2 minutes. I'm sorry, we do have to get across the street for session.
Okay, got it. Chair Pohusky, Vice Chairs Hill and Martin, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for hearing my comments on HB 5205. You should also have a hard copy in hand. I'm Carrie Lesueur, Legal Director at For Love of Water, a Traverse City-based organization with a mission to ensure that the waters of the Great Lakes Basin are healthy, public, and protected for all. HB 5205 will facilitate these goals by restoring vital rulemaking authority to our environmental agencies. I want to emphasize that Michigan's rule promulgation process is full of safeguards to ensure administrative rulemaking that is well-informed, competent, transparent, involves the legislature, advances the public interest. Rulemaking requires a regulatory impact statement and a cost-benefit analysis of any proposed rule. There are numerous checks and balances incorporated into the rulemaking process, including public hearings, public comment, and review by the Bipartisan Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. By barring EGLE from fulfilling its obligations to protect Michigan's waters and environment, the legislature is violating a mandatory constitutional duty to protect the air, water, and natural resources of the state from pollution, impairment, or destruction. That's the actual language of NREPA. There's also a constitutional mandate at Section 42, Part 2. The EGLE representative mentioned the risk of de-delegation, and so I'd like to read to you the section from the Code of Federal Regulation that discusses the state's responsibility to stay in compliance with the Federal Clean Water Act. The EPA administrator may withdraw program approval when a state program no longer complies with the requirements of this part and the state fails to take corrective action. Such circumstances include the following: where the state's legal authority no longer meets the requirements of this part, including 1, failure of the state to promulgate or enact new authorities when necessary, or 2, action by a state legislature or court striking down or limiting state authorities. Michigan is well across this line, as threats to Michigan's waters and the people, animals, and biota that rely on them evolve. State agencies must be nimble to respond appropriately. to protect Michigan's precious waters from further pollution and her taxpayers from costly legal jeopardy, Flow recommends immediate repeal of MCL 324.31032 via HB 5205. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions briefly? All right. Thank you very much for the time. We have several cards to read in very quickly. Not wishing to speak in opposition to the bill, we have Dawn Crandall from the Michigan Home Builders, Brad Ward from the Michigan Realtors, and Ed Noyola from the County Road Association. Not wishing to speak in support of the bill, Bill Wood from the West Michigan Environmental Action Council, Marie McCormick from Friends of the Rouge, Brittany Somerville, Healthy Pine River, Evan Zimmerman, Upper Peninsula Environmental Coalition, Jennifer McKay, Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, Tom Zimnicki, Alliance for the Great Lakes, David Lossing, Huron River Watershed Council, Scott Troya, Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, Sean McBroody, Clean Water Action, Pam Taylor, who is with Environmentally Concerned Citizens of South Central Michigan, Chris Semmernick from the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, Peggy Case, Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation, Stephen Colby Brown, Sierra Club Huron Valley, John Fournier, City of Ann Arbor, Thomas Progar, Veg Michigan, Kim Corona, Michiganders for a Just Farming System, John Reynolds as a private citizen, Cheryl Rubel, private citizen, Cynthia Wadley, private citizen, Beatrice Freelander, private citizen, Valerie Shea, private citizen, Charles Carpenter, private citizen, John Kushel, private citizen, and Cynthia Van Rettergem, also a private citizen. Thank you all for the time. There being no further business for the committee will stand adjourned.